You are listening to Bantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, I am your co-host, and this week I am joined, as always, by the busiest man in Star Wars fandom, Mr. Mark Newbold. Marky boy, how you doing?
I'm very well, mate. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How's your week in Star Wars been?
My week in Star Wars has been busy, surprisingly not. A few things come into the collection, so I'm in the process now of going through all my posters. So I've got loads of poster rolls and loads of prints. And I got one of those sort of big racks where you can sort of flick through all the posters that you used to find in Smith's. So I managed to get one of those off eBay a few years ago. But I'd put prints in them, and they're not really for prints, they're for posters. So I've took all the prints out of it, opened up rolls of posters that I've never opened and put them in there so it looks nice and tidy. But now the prints are just sort of lying on the side. So I'd ordered some bags for the prints, and now I've just ordered some backing boards for the bags to put the prints in, and yada, yada, yada. So it's all coming together. It's looking really nice and tidy. Collectibles wise, I've had lots of Indiana Jones stuff come through. I'm on an Indiana Jones kick at the moment. So and I've ordered the Pioneer Laserdisc box set this week. I've ordered, I think it was like the 2003 American VHS box. Might have been even earlier than that. So lots of little fiddly, old Young Indiana Jones Chronicles patch that I'd been after for a while came through. So lots of little fiddly farty bits. How about you, mate?
My week's been pretty good. Again, kind of collectible wise, not had a huge amount through this week. But what I did get was, I believe it would have been from one of the Star Wars weekends at Disney. It's a Acme Archive Luke Skywalker character key pin.
Okay.
Empire Strikes Back, Bespin Luke in his kind of fatigues. Have you seen the Acme Archive character keys that they did a few years back?
Yeah, I've funny, I've just mentioned it. I've got the Indiana Jones one.
I've got a couple of the Star Wars ones. They're quite nice, actually.
They're a nice size, aren't they?
Yeah, they're kind of like, I don't know, 7x9, so they're kind of quite frameable and stuff like that. But so this one, it looks exactly like that. It looks no different, but obviously the character of Luke is a cut-out pin, so that'll go on my Luke Skywalker focus kind of shelf, so that'll be fun.
So it's been a week for you.
It's been a busy week, yeah, but it's all good. But it's also been a fairly busy week for Star Wars, and in particular, Star Wars Awards.
Star Wars Awards. Mandalorian just seems to be on an absolute purple patch at the moment with awards, as does the Clone Wars. As you quite rightly point out, yes, both have picked up awards this week. So the Clone Wars won an Annie Award for Best Music TV Media. So Kevin Kiner obviously picking up another award there. We've got an interview with Kevin coming up very soon here on the show and on Bantha Tracks TV, so stay tuned for that. And then, as you say, The Mandalorian as well, which seems to be picking up technical awards and all sorts of stuff. It also picked up an Annie Award for Best Character Animation in Live Action. And then it also won 2 Motion Picture Sound Editor Awards, Sound Editing, Episodic Short Form, and Effects Foley and Dialogue ADR. All big technical words, which basically mean The Mandalorian's awesome and it's getting all the credit and plaudits it deserves. It's really good to see Star Wars projects get noticed like this and awarded like this when we've had years of the big screen movies. ILM gets passed over, none of the actors ever get a shout.
It's amazing, and obviously congratulations to everybody who've been involved with both Clone Wars and The Mandalorian. But you're right, I mean, I think also it's one of those things that it's nice to have, but I think it's a good reminder to not necessarily hang your hat on these awards, because as you say, the actors, and George hasn't really ever received any kind of like awards really for himself and stuff like that, and some of that stuff is obviously down to politics and goes back to him leaving like the Directors Guild and that. You know, I think Star Wars is well and truly due for stuff, and at the end of the day, the awards bodies, they look for different things, but they seem to have really woken up and started to appreciate the amazing effort that everybody's putting in on Disney Plus shows and Star Wars TV in general.
Bantha Tracks. Hoodoo!
Following on last week's sad news that Felix and the puppeteer behind Yaddle had passed away, this week 2 more people from the original trilogy have left us. Felix Silla, who played the hang-gliding Ewok in Return of the Jedi, has passed away aged 84. And model maker Ira Keeler, who also worked on Return of the Jedi, Phantom Menace, and all sorts of projects in between, He's also passed away. He was 81.
There is a good interview with Ira Keeler in issue 200 of the Star Wars Insider. So if you haven't picked that one up, it's worth picking up and reviewing it because, like, as you said, he covered a lot of the big films in and around that. So and sad news about Felix as well, because I've seen him on the circuit a couple of times and I've listened to him on a couple of different podcasts, and he seems like a really fun guy that have been around. So, and of course, not only was he the hang gliding Ewok in Return of the Jedi, but he played Tweaky in Buck Rogers in the 25th century. So that is an iconic character in amongst itself. So
exactly, yeah. You kind of forget, you see these guys come in and do a bit of work on Star Wars, and they become like part of our crew, don't they? In that sense, so. As you say, he was the Ewok, but he was also Howard the Duck. He was in Temple of Doom. Buck Rogers, he was in the Addams Family back in the day. He was in one of the very earliest Star Trek episodes. He was really a busy guy. And like you say, Ira Keeler, Back to the Future, Men in Black, Inner Space, Jurassic Park, my favourite Star Trek movie, First Contact. He worked on all sorts of stuff. He was even in Star Tours as a crew member. So terribly sad. Two more good people have left us.
Hi, this is Dave Chapman, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So depending on which side of the parish you sit, it's either good news or bad news, but it seems that the filming of Andor at Little Marlow is due to wrap up on the 18th of April, which, if you're listening to this day and date release, would have been this Sunday. It sounds like they've finished production on the exterior locations they were using on that set and are probably moving on to newer locations and different and other things.
Yeah, I guess they've filmed all the outdoor stuff they want to do. They obviously had to work around the pandemic and issues surrounding that, and we put a post on the site about some of the locals weren't that thrilled, but actually it read to me that more of the locals were happy that it was there.
Exactly, yeah.
And reading Brian's really in-depth piece on Bantha, it feels like the local council have kind of really bought into having this facility, as Chris Evans said, opposite the garden centre. So I think other film productions could come there, which of course means future Star Wars productions could come there. Yeah,
true.
It looks like a win-win for everybody, really. Guess now they move back to Pinewood, back into studios, and quite possibly stagecraft setups as well, because we understand there's a stagecraft setup either there or going there. So there's obviously the potential for that. So Andor moves on. Great news.
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? It'd be interesting to see, and hopefully we will see when the series gets completed, as to how much they actually spent filming on Little Marlow. As we've talked before, it looks like a street with various offshoots. Yeah. So you wonder if this is a planet they return to a couple of times, or if it's just a planet for one single episode. The photo that we use on the Fantha Tracks articles, it looks like it's a big installation. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how much this features in the final series. So good news in some respects, because it just means that with COVID and everything else, they seem to be able to keep the juggernaut moving on.
It did seem to be a very big set, in the same way that Navarro was the base for The Mandalorian Season 1, and that Lothal was the base for Season 1 of Rebels. You know what I mean? It feels like that's the home base, whatever planet this is. It might be somewhere we don't know, but my gut tells me it's somewhere new. We'll find out. That location feels like it's quite substantial because there's a lot of building there. They built a lot of real estate there. Yeah, and I suppose it's the sort of thing you can, to a certain degree, move around and redress and change. I'm certain that they've not sort of concreted these things in, that those buildings could be rejigged into another configuration if they wanted to. And ILM are working on this. They can do whatever they want. More excitement builds for this show, which I can't wait for this show. This is the one I'm really hot for.
If you've had a chance to look at the sci-fi.com article, they spoke to Stellan Skarsgård, and he basically reckons that Andor is going to be the darkest and most realistic Lucasfilm project to date. So it's kind of really taken its cues from the aesthetic of Rogue One, and it sounds like it's going to get even more kind of intense. It's a sleeper of the series, I think. Everybody seems to be a lot more focused on Kenobi, I think partly because of the notoriety of Obi-Wan Kenobi in the series, but also Ewan McGregor coming back into reprise the role. Andor's quite new still. Like Rogue One is quite easily up there with a lot of fans' like favourite Star Wars films. It probably just hasn't kind of picked up the momentum just from like the years of it being out and around.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's odd, 5 years this year, You think back to when Star Wars came out, 5 years after Star Wars was 1982. We were waiting for Jedi. So it's 5 years in Star Wars terms. It's quite a long time. But Rogue One is so popular now. People are so fond of that film. It does make me kind of smile that people aren't more excited for Andor. But also, I think, I see things on social media when you're knocking around. And one of the things that I saw was somebody tweeted, and forgive me, I can't remember who it was, but their question was, tell me out there, who was introduced to Star Wars by somebody other than their dad? So obviously this was a young man or a young woman who was introduced to Star Wars by their dad. And to them, that was the way that they were introduced to Star Wars. And so some people are like, yeah, it was my dad, or yeah, it was my mom, or it was my aunt or my uncle, or I found it myself, or whatever. And a few people, older people like myself, was like, well, you know, I was 6 when the film came out. My dad was 30 when Star Wars came out, pretty much. So he got no interest in it whatsoever. He couldn't care less. He was a businessman. He was working, and it was the 70s, and it just, films weren't then what they are now. It was totally different. It was my mum's best friend got me a comic, and that's what got me into it. The conversation was basically then sort of spiraled off into all sorts of weird corridors, and one of which was people saying, I'm kind of sick of people who were around when Star Wars came out saying, I saw this or I've got that. And my thought on that was, I get that, because there is a gatekeepery aspect to that. Yeah. But it's not your fault that you're an old fart and that you just happen to be around. It's not my fault I was 6 when Star Wars came out. I can't help it. It's just my experience. And what I'm saying is that I think sometimes there's a negativity towards anything that's touching on the original trilogy, especially the early era, you know, A New Hope original trilogy, because Star Wars now, when we grew up, Star Wars was like E.T. and certain films were above and beyond everything else. Star Wars is its own world now, essentially. So if you're a Star Wars fan now and you've come in via a multitude of avenues, and let's say you're 15 now, and Star Wars is everything, the original Star Wars doesn't stand out to 15-year-old kids the way it stood out to us as 15-year-old kids. Do you know what I mean? Because there's so many other things. There's all the TV shows. There's all the other movies we've had since. A New Hope, it isn't on the pedestal it used to be to newer fans because they've come in to Star Wars from a different door. Yeah, I'm a bit older than you, as we constantly talk about. You know, but the OT was... There was nothing else, so that's what I got into, and then comics and books and blah, 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 and Ewoks and droids and everything else. And you came in at droids, as we talked about the other week. Yeah. But you know what I mean? So, but if you're 10 years younger than you'd have come in at the prequels, and if you were 10 years younger than that, you'd come in at the sequels, you know, so everyone's got their door. It just strikes me in relation to Andor, there's a little bit of, oh, you're not going there again. You know, oh, Star Wars, oh, God, you know. I mean, A New Hope, that's what I'm getting at. For me, to see the build-up to Scarif and Yavin, that's what's lighting me up. And also, if it's got anything like, I mean, Skarsgård says it, you know, when I saw Rogue One, it had much more atmosphere and seemed a little bit more mature, and that was Tony Gilroy, who's the showrunner in this one. So he's giving props to Tony Gilroy for adding that dark, I think it was always there, but giving that dark twist, that darkness, that, you know, there is a dangerous edge to Rogue One, even though it's a eminently rewatchable film. Not many people get out the back end of that one, do they? No, well, that's part of it. You do touch on an interesting thing. I suppose Star Wars really has influenced the Star Wars makers of today. That's the thing, which is why I think in some respects they did spend a lot of time setting up Rogue One. And I want to say I'm talking about crossover with Star Wars Rebels, which of course, when you think about it, is two totally different ends of a generational sphere. I wonder if it's a bit like, and forgive me everybody, because this is the first time I'm going to do it in a while, I wonder if it's a bit like Star Trek, because there's that disconnect, isn't there, between the next generation era of fans and then those who are around for the original series. Yeah. That's just the nature of these long, ongoing science fiction franchises, really. We keep on saying it. I know we've said it before on this podcast, like, you know, Star Wars is for everyone, and there's a little bit of Star Wars for just about anyone who wants to kind of sit down and watch it. Yeah. The problem is, as the franchise develops and grows, sometimes it might be that you have to spend a little bit of time finding the Star Wars that you really love amongst all the stuff that you either just quite like or you could just ignore. I love that, because with you and me, you know, when you got into Star Wars when you were a kid, when you were like 6 or 7, like I was 6 or 7, all I could watch was A New Hope. There was literally nothing else, and comics. When you got into it, you'd got the original trilogy, Ewoks, Battle for Endor, and droids, let's say, when an Ewoks cartoon, when you got into it. So you got a little bit more, but not that much more. Not like you got hundreds of hours more or whatever. You'd got the comic run hadn't quite finished, Bantha tracks were still going, the Buena Vista book and cassettes was out, and the soundtracks and the original 96 were out, I think, by then pretty much, but there wasn't a huge amount. But then if you come into it later, if you come into it in 2015... You've got all the Clone Wars, you've got all of that, all the books and comics, and so much more that you could get into. In relation to A New Hope, and I'll consider Andor as part of that because it's leading up to Rogue One, which is bumper to bumper. Like Force Awakens and Last Jedi are bumper to bumper. Rogue One and A New Hope are bumper to bumper. So they really are tight films together. They're two-parters, essentially. Coming to Star Wars in 2015 and you're 15 years old, let's say, there's no reason why you would look at that whole smorgasbord of Star Wars and go, I'm going to start with A New Hope, other than the fact that it was the first one, because You've had all that prequel era stuff. You might want to do it chronologically. You might go, I'm going to start playing Old Republic, or I'm going to start reading some of that old Dark Horse Tales of the Jedi stuff. Or, you've got a completely different perspective on how you want to run your way through Star Wars. And it can be quite intimidating, exactly like Star Trek was, when people are like, I like this Discovery, but do I have to have watched the 800 hours of stuff that came before it? It's like, no, you don't. It helps. It's fun.
It helps, especially in the pandemic.
Well, that's true. You pick up on all the Easter eggs, but you certainly don't need to do that. There's not a huge amount of excitement of Andor, and this surprises me because, like, for me, it's like, this is going to be just, I'm going to be popcorn at 8 o'clock on a Friday morning for me watching this.
Just from a fan perspective, it kind of feels like even when Lucasfilm announced it and when they've had the presentations and stuff, it doesn't seem to get quite the kind of spectacle or the focus as Kenobi does.
You mean like under the radar?
Yeah, a little bit. Kind of like, and this is me, I'm just only going from my memory, but it never felt like there was a big announcement about Andor. It was always like, there's a big announcement about The Mandalorian or about Kenobi. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe that's because Obi-Wan Kenobi as a character is pretty much a household name because of the fact he was in the very first Star Wars film 40 odd years ago. True. And then also, as you say, you've now got kind of what I call the third generation of Star Wars fans who were the ones who grew up with the prequels. Their Star Wars is episode 1, 2, and 3. And then obviously they watch the older ones and find it a little bit slower and not as dynamic. And obviously the CG is a bit naff, and that obviously plays into it. And I suppose you look at it from a wider audience perspective and kind of go, well, actually, if you were to show a picture of either Ewan McGregor or Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi up against Diego Luna as Cassian Andor, how many people would actually, know who Cassian Andor was over Kenobi? Yeah. And I think that's probably what it comes down to, is just that kind of smart marketing. And maybe that will change as Andor gets closer to its release. I wonder if we're going to start to see a bit more of a focus, a bit more like a recap or some kind of push to kind of remind people of how important the Rogue One film and the story is to Star Wars.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you look at Kenobi and you've got, this has gone way off from where I thought we'd go with this conversation. You've got, Ewan McGregor, who's like a big star name. He's a massive name in cinema and television, and here in the UK with the train spotting thing and pop culture and all the other stuff. Ewan McGregor's a big name. He's the guy you can pin Kenobi on. And you don't need other big names in Kenobi, but you've got Hayden Christensen. There could be a Yoda appearance in it. There could be a Bail Organa appearance in it. There could quite possibly be a Qui-Gon appearance in it as he learns to commune. So there's all these different things that you could throw into Kenobi if you want to throw into Kenobi. And I still say he's got General Grievous' ship as well, so I'm certain we're going to see that. It's just me. And then you go to Cassian, and you've got Fiona Shaw's in it. Big name, Emmy winner for Killing Eve. We just mentioned Stellan Skarsgård, who's been in all sorts of stuff, not least Thor and the Marvel films. And there's other actors in there, and there's going to be other actors coming into it. But of course, you've got Mon Mothma's going to be in there. You've probably got other characters from Rogue One.
Jimmy Smits.
Exactly. Bail Organa could be in it. General Dodonna, Ian McElhenney could be in it. There's quite a few people who could quite conceivably turn up in Rogue One, meaning that whilst obviously you've got a massive star in Ewan McGregor leading Kenobi, in terms of Star Wars characters, which to us are the stars, I think Andor's got more scope, because Kenobi's out in the desert. Bonnie Peace and Joel Edgerton, of course, they've just announced for Kenobi as well. So you've got Owen and Beru, and more than likely, if you're going to see Owen Beru, you're probably going to see a 10-year-old Luke Skywalker. Some kid will be playing a young Mark Hamill, unless they can really do some great de-aging work at ILM and they can figure that one out. But you know what I mean? It's just, there's some great options there for both shows. Yeah, I mean, Kenobi's coming first, so you put your focus on what's coming next. I get that. Marvel are doing that quite correctly now. They're hyping us for Loki, then they're hyping us for Black Widow, then they're hyping us for What If, then they're hyping us for Hawkeye. There's Eternals coming, Shang-Chi coming, there's all sorts of stuff coming. But for Star Wars, I get why the focus is on what it's on. Bad Batch starts within the next couple of 3 weeks, which we'll be reviewing here on the site, of course, every week. I think Andor's really going to surprise people. And just to go quickly back to this, Stellan Skarsgård all over that. I don't know what he's playing. I don't care. I think he's great to watch, and I'm looking forward to it very much.
I'm Corey D, and I get my Star Wars news from Panther Tracks.
A week after Phoebe Waller-Bridge was announced as joining the cast of Indiana Jones 5, untitled movie, and John Williams is coming back to compose, of course, how could he not? Deadline have announced that Mads Mikkelsen is joining the cast as well. So now you've got Phoebe Waller-Bridge from Solo, A Star Wars Story, joining Mads Mikkelsen from Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Got to wonder, is Admiral Raddus going to turn up? Who else is coming over? Wonderful to see. I posted a piece on Panther Tracks about it, hypothesised at the end about, Indy's had kids, you saw his kid in Crystal Skull, and, we don't know who Phoebe Waller-Bridge is playing. I think there could be flashbacks coming. I don't know. But also, Mads Mikkelsen, you know, he's got that European feel about him. Maybe this is Belloc's kid coming back. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. But whatever he comes back as, maybe he's the big bad. Who knows? Maybe Phoebe's the big bad. What do you think? What do you think Mads is going to be doing in Indy 5?
Oh, I mean, being a big James Bond fan, Mads Mikkelsen played a masterful Lashif in Casino Royale. Yeah. And so immediately I just go, that's where he's going. He's going to be the baddie. But I kind of feel like Indiana Jones probably does need a little bit of a twist. Maybe he's not a baddie. And I kind of hope actually it is Phoebe Waller-Bridge, to be honest. I don't know why, I just think that it might be quite fun to see her in that kind of role, because we've kind of seen her as the lovable kind of like sidekick in Solo. I think it might be quite interesting to see her do something completely different. So I think what we'll do is we should make a note. So I'm gonna make a note on my.
I say this every week.
Yeah, and things I do when we talk about this stuff, I do tend to actually write it down. So what's your bets for Mads? You reckon Mads is going to be?
I would like to see it because he is such a good bad guy.
Yeah.
It feels too obvious to have him as a bad guy. Not that I wouldn't want him as the bad guy, because he's great. He was great in Doctor Strange. But then he was such a great, sympathetic, sort of flawed hero in Rogue One. Yeah. You were right about Lashif in Casino Royale. So, you know, and he's Hannibal and all the other stuff he's done. I'm going to say it and write it down. He's going to be a good guy. That's my guess.
Okay. So New Bold reckons he's going to be a good guy. Mulcaster's going to go with the classic, quintessential, mustache twirling bad guy, I think. What do you think about Phoebe Waller-Bridge? Where do you think she sits?
Well, Indy as a character was married before he was married to Marion. In the books and the comics and such, he'd been married before, and I forget the lady's name now.
Mrs. Jones?
Mrs. Jones, yeah. As opposed to, I've got to tell you this. Here we go. Kitchen sink drama. I was literally doing the washing up the other day, and my thought for the greatest cameo possible in Indiana Jones 5 came to my mind. Do you know what it was?
Go on then.
I would have pitched this to Spielberg. You have Indiana Smith turned up, played by Tom Selleck, the other great archaeologist of his time. So Harrison Ford was Indiana Jones, but Tom Selleck was Indiana Smith, which was, of course, the original title for the film until Spielberg said, no, Jones sounds better than Smith. Indiana Smith doesn't sound right. Indiana Jones sounds right, rolls off the tongue. So I think you should have Tom Selleck turn up in a floral Hawaiian shirt. It's going to be set in the late 60s, early 70s, rolls up in a red Ferrari, famous archaeologist Indiana Smith. That's my pitch for a great, very obvious Easter egg. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I'd love to see her as the baddie, because I mean she's so damn witty and so attractive to watch, and just everything about her is awesome. I think I'm a big fan. I think she's fantastic. So to have her as a real cerebral villain, but sharp-witted, and I really hope they let her have a crack at the script. You know, like Carrie used to have a go at scripts and stuff and do script doctoring and punch them up and do stuff. You know, she did all sorts of things. I kind of see Phoebe in that sort of similar vein of wit. You know what I mean? And so I think she could do something quite clever with a script like that. And I think she could only make it better. Even a great script, she could only make it better. I'd like to see her as the baddie. I'd like to see Mads as the goodie. But again, I'm going to stick to what I said. I still think there's going to be flashback sequences back to Indy's earlier days, you know, sort of young Indy Chronicles style, where you've got an older Harrison Ford playing Indy as an older man now. Still looks phenomenal. Yeah. He can still knock 10 years off his age and get away with it. But nevertheless, I think there's some real scope to this one. And Mangold did such a great job with Logan and Ford versus Ferrari. That film, I love that film. And he directs with a beauty. He's got a great eye, which is what excites me. So I think this film could be something really special. Just to say, I love Crystal Skull, so I've no dig on Crystal Skull. Indy's a 4-film saga for me. It's not a trilogy. It's 4 films, and that's very much part of it. So, yeah, bring it on. I'm looking forward to this.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark banthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So you may remember a couple of months ago, we discussed some of the tweets that author Soraya Wilson had put out about her chat with, I think, first Daisy Ridley, and then she had a online Zoom chat or something, but I think she won in an auction, some charity auction, with Last Jedi director Rian Johnson. So over the last couple of days, she has been tweeting a few other nuggets about the conversation she had with Rian, and one of those was basically the fact that he would really love to direct an episode of The Mandalorian. She goes on to say that he'd visited visited the set and spent some time with Baby Yoda and looking at the stagecraft tech, which kind of makes sense from a director's standpoint to be there and to see what's going on at Lucasfilm. Mark, as Last Jedi is not your most favourite of Star Wars films, would you be happy and cool with Rian directing Mandalorian, considering obviously the kind of polarisation of the fandom that can happen after the release of The Last Jedi?
It's not my favourite Star Wars film, but I do like the way he directed it in terms of the visuals. I think he's got a great eye for Star Wars. So if he was bringing that to The Mandalorian, I'd be all in for it. To bring that visual flair to the show would be great. My only question is, and I did put it in the piece on the site, Mandalorian as a show has a very specific style and a very specific look. And really, you look at the, 16 episodes we've had or 16 chapters, we've had so far.
Yeah.
Tonally, you know from chapter 1 to chapter 16, it's the same show. It's just got a look and a feel that is uber consistent, and that's got to come from Favreau and Filoni. My only worry, question, thought on somebody with such a distinctive style and somebody who very much likes to sort of steer his own carriage coming into the show like that is tonally and stylistically, would it still fit? Now, that could be Rian Johnson. It could be, not that he'd ever do it, Steven Spielberg. It could be Quentin Tarantino. And we've mentioned Trek, so I'll go there. There was all that talk of Tarantino doing a Trek movie. I was all up for that. But in terms of The Mandalorian, it's been so, to me as a viewer, I think, so diligent in keeping that consistent feel and not letting a director come in and overwhelm it with his or her style. There's very clear boundaries, it seems to me, on what you can and cannot do stylistically within The Mandalorian. Now, if Rian Johnson was happy to come in and play in that sandpit and keep that style, then I would be all in, because I think it's a PR exercise, negative or positive, get people talking. And I know this from any measure of IPs who you would imagine would be mortified that everybody's moaning about this. But actually, it's all about interaction on social media. Whether you're talking positive or talking negative, the highlight's always put on the negative, but it's generally a much smaller percentage than the positive. That's why news generally talks about things going wrong rather than things going right. It's that kind of logic. So I think him coming in would be a good thing. But like he says, he's been on the set, he's seen stagecraft, he's tremendously busy. He's just signed that crazy, $400 million deal for Knives Out 2 and 3. So, he's a busy man. There's still talk of him doing the trilogy of his own anyway at some point, which feels like it's quite a way away. And he could always be courted by other people between now and then. JJ went off to Apple and, people go off, or Warner Media rather, and people go off to different places, and Benioff and Weiss were going to come and do Star Wars, then they're off doing a Netflix thing. And so people get pulled off in different directions. So until it happens, until everyone's behind the camera, and even then, I'll believe it when I see it, sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's likely to direct an episode of Mandalorian unless Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni feel comfortable that they are going to be able to work within the confines of the Mandalorian. Now, that being said, obviously, there's no reason why you can't instill a certain level of your own directorial personality on an episode, per se. Some directors have signature camera moves and stuff like that. So, then that's what they do. They kind of try and incorporate that into the show. It would be far more managed than if you were to just say to him, like with Last Jedi, off you go and write episode 8 and direct episode 8. When you're a TV director and you're working on TV series, you're only doing like 1 or 2 episodes, and you have to kind of fit in, like basically jumping onto a treadmill to some degree. You've got to keep up with the pace, obviously, and you've got to be aware that you're only directing 1 episode, so it's got to fit with what happened before and potentially what happens afterwards. You can't necessarily just do completely your own thing. Now, obviously, I know that anybody who's listening to what I'm saying now is going to say, well, why didn't he do that in The Last Jedi? But I think the difference there is the fact that he was given the scope and to kind of do his own thing a little bit more than maybe he could have if they had kind of like thought about it. Whereas I think in a TV series like this, you'd have everything planned out and beat it out already, so you'd know where you're going to go. So I think it's not a bad thing. I would love to see it. There's always going to be people who are going to be like negative about anything. I think that's just for part and parcel of where we now are. Rather than kind of like hide from it and shy away from it, just I guess you kind of have to embrace the negativity and use it to your advantage, as you say, as a PR tool.
Yeah, the whole question she asked, would you ever consider doing an episode of The Mandalorian? And you look at a writer-director like Rian Johnson, and to me, I'm thinking they mean direct an episode. We want you to get behind that camera. I want you to lay it all out, and you're directing the actors off a script. Doing an episode might mean writing and directing. There's not that many people who've written, and I would imagine coming into a show like The Mandalorian, as you say, let's say it's an 8-chapter season, and he comes in and they say, "Well, what to do chapter 5?" He's going to know where he's starting from and where he's dropping off. The criticism that he gets for The Last Jedi, I feel, is very unfair, because any finger pointing, if you want to do that, shouldn't be at Rian Johnson for making the choices he made, because they said, "Dude, there's your notepad and there's your pen, go and write a Star Wars film."
Yeah, exactly.
It seems to me that the handoff to the next story or whatever wasn't incumbent on him to consider, because he wasn't doing episode 9. It wasn't his problem. And they'd not said, "This is how it reads to me. This is very much how it reads to me. I don't know if this is fact. This is just my supposition." It doesn't feel to me like they'd gone, "Right, we want you to hit these pointers at the end of episode 8. And he went, "Oh, no, screw that. I'll do what I want to do, thanks. Yeah, I've got the keys to the car. I'll drive it where I want." It doesn't feel like that's the plan, or that was the plan.
No.
But it should have been. And he's a big boy. He wouldn't have had the power to say no. That's what I'm saying. It just felt like he was given a lot of carte blanche, and like any Star Wars fan with a camera who's got a $200 million budget and the capacity to do it, he went and made the film we wanted to make, and hats off to him, The thing with this, I would imagine, is that by the time you're sitting down to start putting camera to chapter 1 of season 3 of The Mandalorian, odds are Favreau and Filoni have written chapter 24. It's already done.
Exactly.
So Rian Johnson will come in, even if they say written from a story by Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, let's say, or maybe even there are sort of standalone Mandalorian episodes within the wider arc. It's like the X-Files, you have the A story, the B story, and the C story. As long as you're fitting in those elements that move you on to, let's say, chapter 6 of season 3, or pick up from chapter 4, whatever it might be, I think there's probably the scope for him to do that, because as creatively, he's a big player now. Knives Out was a monster hit on the budget it was made for. And look at the cast he got together. He's somebody people want to work with and work for. It's all stacked up for him and lined up for him. So he's in a great place creatively. So if they just said, "Yeah, we just want you to direct it," in a bit like directed like just any other bugger could direct it. Yeah, pretty much. Nah, I'll pass. I'll wait for the next show, thanks. You know what I mean? He's probably got enough clout that he can do more. But like I say, it's not his creative sandbox. In this instance, it's the Favreau and Filoni show as far as the Mandalorian goes, and they'll go, "This is what we want you to do. Add your flair and flavour to it. This is the story we want to tell.
This is what's happening."
Yeah,
exactly.
and I think that's how he'd prosper doing that. So I think it's a great idea, personally.
And I think you do hit it kind of like on the head when we look back at The Last Jedi and how it kind of links between Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker. JJ didn't do anybody who was going to pick up episode 8 any favours with basically leaving that kind of cliffhanger the way he did, really, in some respects. Yeah. And I guess the thing is, again, it goes to the people who are actually overseeing the production higher up than just the directors.
Yeah.
Just the writers. It comes down to the producers and the executive producers to be kind of actually saying, "Well, hang on a sec, this isn't going to work," or "What happens with this?" And I mean, I think part of it, the sequel trilogy in amongst itself was probably a huge learning curve for everybody, at Disney and at Lucasfilm, who really, it's their first Star Wars film that they've worked on in a non-Lucas era. Yeah. And obviously they're kind of considering things that never needed to be considered in the same way as previous and stuff. So, Lucas, to be fair, could be Rian Johnson. He could be like, "Well, I don't listen to what the fans want, and I don't care what they've been talking about on Twitter for the last 2.5 years. This is what I wanted to tell, and this is where I think the story should go, and this is the story that I want to tell." And I think that is quite an important point, really.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if there was some, if there was some notebook with a basic plot for 7, 8, and 9, because originally it would have been like the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy is all George. Original trilogy is George Kirshner and Markman.
Yep.
You get to this trilogy, and originally it was going to be Abrams, Johnson, Trevorrow. And then they had their issues with Trevorrow, and JJ comes back. And for me, in a way, and I like The Rise of Skywalker. I find it very watchable, and I enjoy it. I do enjoy it because I like JJ's style, I like his aesthetic, and I like the way he does things. And I think he brings out great performances from his actors. So I really like his films for that reason. But looking back at it now, 2 years removed, I almost wish that 9 had been directed by somebody other than JJ. I think it would have made it easier on the trilogy as a whole, because he can't help but have his own headcanon. JJ didn't exactly do the next director, whoever that was, and they knew it was Rian at that point, but they didn't exactly do him any favours by sort of just leaving him hanging with, there's Rey with the sabre, and there's Luke just looking at her, and there's the camera sweeping the credits. And I think a lot of fans would have expected Luke to go, great, let's go, back to adventure, and off we go, and heroic return of Luke Skywalker, which would have been the easy option, and maybe, certainly to older fans, a very satisfying reaction. And let's see Luke back in action again. We never saw him at his peak as a Jedi, after Return of the Jedi, and yada yada, all the options and thoughts that you could possibly throw at it. And there's Rian Johnson going, well, that's so easy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just having him just come back and be the hero. Why was he on the island for all those years if he could just become a hero and come back again? So he's obviously sat down and thought it through and thought, no, there's got to be a reason why Luke's just got down on himself and in on himself. And what I'm saying really is that, Last Jedi is far from my favourite Star Wars film. But the more I think on it, the more I think on the story mechanics, I appreciate it more than I did when it came out. Let's put it that way. I've got more appreciation for what Rian Johnson was trying to do now. I'm swung because I like JJ's directorial style and I like the aesthetic. I look at Last Jedi sometimes and it feels to me like it was made by completely different people. But even visually, it feels like ILM did 7 and 9 and Digital Domain did Episode 8. You know what I mean? And so there's just that tweak to the style. But that being said, you look at Star Wars, you look at Empire, you look at Jedi. Okay,
totally different.
Different, completely different. And I know the technology was progressing light years back then compared to nudging along now. There's no hyper leaps these days compared to what we had back then. But nevertheless, they were very different. And that's why I say, as much as I appreciate 9, I enjoy 9, I think it was an impossible job of wrapping up 9 movies. So I think he did a fairly good job for what it was. I do kind of wish it hadn't been JJ. I wish it had been somebody else's vision, because then you couldn't beat it with that stick, because JJ's naturally going to think, well, I kind of wanted Luke to do this at the end of 7, into 8. Well, sorry, JJ, you turned down directing 8. You didn't want to do it. So to then want to pick up your threads from 7, you could watch 7 and miss out 8 completely and pick up enough from the start of 9 to kind of know what happened in 8. That's a bit unfair on 8. So even though it's not my favourite film, in a sense, it's been dealt a rough hand.
Yeah.
I'm really rambling today, and I'm surprising myself by how generous I'm being to Last Jedi, because like I say, it's took me a while to come round to it. It really has. It's a tricky one for me, but I do think it deserves more credit than it gets from people who don't like it a lot.
And there you go, everybody. It's taken me just over a year, but I think we finally made progress with Mr. Mark Newbold when it comes to The Last Jedi. But I think you do make a good point, and the point that I will just quickly pick up on, I think really what they should have done, and it's not because of anything else other than I think that by trying to tie up all the films and put a bow on it and basically end the Skywalker saga, I think that's the mistake, because it's kind of put more focus and poignancy on that last episode than possibly it needed to be. They literally didn't need to do that. They literally don't need to kind of say this is the end of the Skywalker saga. They literally could have just finished episode 9 exactly as it is.
Yep.
And we could have moved on and kind of gone, well, I wonder what's going to be next for Star Wars, because, but now it kind of feels like there's a finality there about it.
There's one thing that strikes me is if you watch Star Trek 6, I don't keep talking about Star Trek, and I'm sorry, but it's a good comparison, I think. You watch the end of Return of the Jedi, you listen to John Williams' music, and at the end, it's it's very triumphant. It's very clear this is the last chapter. The first time I saw Revenge of the Sith, I got choked up because that music at the end was a complete celebration of Star Wars. And very clearly, you know what I mean? It's very clear. This is the end. This is it.
It was like John Williams' end, really, wasn't it? It was kind of like, it felt like it was John Williams kind of going, this is my, almost like my gift to the fans, to kind of like, this is the Star Wars saga as it was. Yeah.
This is me signing off. And he did it again for Rise of Skywalker. I look at Star Trek 6, which was the last of the original crew's adventures. You listen to the end music from Star Trek 6, right? You've had that beautiful scene that Endgame copied with the actors signing the signatures, which I adore. I love that because we've talked about that before, why that means so much to me as a fan. And you go through the music. It's a great soundtrack, by the way. It's a great score. And you get to the end, and the end of it is it's not all la 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 la. It's a proper.
It's the end. It's like a crescendo of like a concert.
Completely. It's a proper hard ending. It's not a soppy. You know what I'm getting at? 9 could have done that. You're right. We know there's going to be further adventures with these characters. We know it. even if in 30 years' time Daisy Ridley goes, I don't want to come back, they'll go, right, we need somebody else to play Rey. There's got to be more with these characters. You've got to move beyond that point. Because it's only the Skywalker's story that's wrapped up. And Rey's taken the name and she's gone to Tatooine and honoured the family by burying the sabres, and then off she goes to more adventures, in the Lego Star Wars Holiday Special and all that sort of stuff. But you know what I mean? There's definitely more. So I think, yes, I've rabbited myself into a cul-de-sac, but there you go.
You're totally right. I think that's just it. It didn't need to be the end per se, and it's not the end. However, I think it's probably about the end for this episode because we have rabbited for long enough. It's probably a good point to kind of like...
Go home. Yes, because we've got our talking heads on today.
Go home.
And we're on a road to nowhere, so we
Exactly,
need to stop.
yeah. So everybody, thanks for listening. And if you have made it this far, then well done. Gold star for you. Hopefully, you should all have now a little badge with your name on it with like gold stars next to it, like we have in McDonald's. If you haven't, we will start doing like a merchandise run so you can get little fanfares for that, because that's what I reckon we should do.
I like that.
So then, yeah. Mark, why don't you tell the good people how they can get in touch if they've got a question or any kind of comment they want to pass on to us?
Okay, to the 3 people who've managed to stick it out through this episode, if you want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Bantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. Well done. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Again, no questions in our saggy sacks today. We need questions, so send us questions. If this episode tells you nothing else, we'll talk about anything and then rub it off about other stuff. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Bantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, at Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Bantha Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. And finally, our marathon is at an end. I'm going to get my gold medal and go home.
Top man.
Thank you.
Look after yourself. Have a great week. Everybody else, stay safe. May the Force be with you, and we'll catch you at episode 87.
Coming up next on Bantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Whoosh.